The night air in Southern California was unusually still. No wind, no distant traffic, no movement beyond the low hum of insects hidden in the dark. A private training facility sat isolated behind a line of eucalyptus trees, far from highways, far from curiosity. Inside the lights were dim, deliberately so. This wasn't a gym. It wasn't a dojo. It wasn't meant to be comfortable. Bruce Lee stood near the center of the floor, barefoot, relaxed, his posture loose in a way that looked careless to anyone who didn't understand him. He wasn't stretching, he wasn't warming up, he was waiting. Bruce had been invited under vague pretenses. A cross-discipline evaluation. No cameras, no press, no audience. He had agreed because the language intrigued him. Evaluation implied measurement, and Bruce was obsessed with measurement, with understanding what was real and what was illusion. He wore simple dark pants and a plain shirt, nothing that suggested status or celebrity. To him, reputation was a distraction. Truth lived in contact, in timing, in consequence. The door opened without ceremony. 10 men entered quietly, not in formation, not clustered, but spaced with intention. Each movement economical, each step deliberate. They didn't scan the room like tourists. They controlled it. Their posture wasn't aggressive, but it was unmistakably professional. These were men trained to operate where chaos was normal and hesitation was lethal. Navy SEALs, though no one said it out loud. They didn't need to. Their presence spoke for them. One of them stepped forward slightly, just enough to establish himself as the voice. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't posture. He simply stated a fact. This isn't a movie. Bruce studied them without changing expression. 10 bodies, 10 breathing patterns, 10 centers of gravity. He noticed the distribution instantly. No one stood directly behind another. No one crowded. Angles were covered. Distance was intentional. This wasn't intimidation. It was containment. "I know," Bruce replied calmly. The man nodded once as if confirming something to himself. "We're not here to spar," he said. "We're here to test." Bruce tilted his head slightly. "Test what?" The man glanced briefly at the others, then back to Bruce. "Limits." There was no hostility in the word, no ego, just curiosity sharpened by training. Bruce smiled faintly. He had heard that word his entire life. Limits were what people used to explain why something couldn't be done. Bruce saw them differently. Limits were habits that hadn't been challenged yet. The men began to move. Not all at once. 2 shifted left, 1 drifted right, 3 adjusted their distance by a step. Bruce noticed something important immediately. They weren't circling him. They were compressing space. Slowly, methodically. No rush, no wasted motion. This wasn't about speed. It was about inevitability. One of them spoke again. "You're fast," he said. "We know that. You're skilled. We know that too. But this isn't one opponent. And there are no rules." Bruce nodded. "There never are." The statement hung in the air longer than expected. Bruce exhaled slowly. His stance didn't change much, but something subtle shifted. His weight distributed differently. His feet aligned with intention. To the untrained eye, it still looked casual. To the men watching him, it looked wrong. Too relaxed, too open, almost careless. "Last chance," the speaker said. "You can stop this here." Bruce looked directly at him. "You already know I won't." The man didn't argue. He raised his hand slightly, then lowered it. 9 seconds. That was the window they had given themselves. Not to subdue him, not to restrain him, just to see what would happen when 10 trained operators closed on one man without theatrics, without hesitation, without narrative. The first move wasn't a strike. It was a step. A coordinated shift that reduced Bruce's available space by nearly half. Bruce moved at the same time, not backward, but diagonally, slipping into a pocket that didn't exist a moment earlier. One of the men reached for him, not to punch, but to control. Bruce's forearm made contact for less than an instant, redirecting the limb just enough to break structure. No impact, no sound, just imbalance. Everything accelerated. Hands reached, bodies collided. The room filled with motion but not chaos. The men worked exactly as trained, overlapping fields, constant pressure, cutting off angles. Bruce responded not by overpowering but by vanishing from expected positions. He wasn't faster than all of them. That wasn't the point. He was earlier. He moved in the spaces between decisions, not after them. One man lost footing. Another stumbled into him. A third hesitated for a fraction of a second, recalibrating. Bruce used that fraction like a door. He passed through it. There was no dramatic choreography, no spinning kicks, no spectacle, just efficiency stripped of ego. Elbows that never fully extended, palms that disrupted balance rather than chased damage, footwork that erased lines of attack before they fully formed. The men adjusted instantly. They were professionals. They learned in motion. Pressure increased. Contact became constant. Bruce felt it now. The weight of numbers. The inevitability of fatigue. This wasn't about winning. It was about understanding how far principle could stretch before reality snapped it. Then something changed. One of the men spoke, breath controlled but tighter now. "He's not fighting us," he said. "He's repositioning us." That realization arrived late. Bruce had never intended to escape the circle. He was shaping it, turning 10 individuals into interference for each other, borrowing force, redirecting intent, letting their precision work against itself. 9 seconds passed. No one was on the ground permanently. No one was unconscious. But the room had changed. The spacing was gone. The structure fractured. Breathing patterns were heavier now. Focus sharper but narrower. The speaker raised his hand again. Everything stopped. Silence returned, broken only by breath and the faint hum of the lights. The man looked at Bruce with something new in his eyes. Not disbelief. Respect wasn't the right word either. It was recalibration. "This isn't a movie," he said again, more quietly this time. Bruce nodded. That's why it worked. No one argued. Because what had just happened didn't fit into training manuals or demonstrations. It didn't prove invincibility. It proved something far more unsettling. That under the right conditions, principles could bend reality just enough to survive it. And that was only the beginning. The men reset without being told to. No signals, no discussion, just instinct shaped by years of operating under pressure. Their breathing slowed, shoulders loosened, eyes sharpened again. What had just happened didn't threaten them. It challenged their model. And men like these didn't reject challenges. They recalibrated. Bruce felt the shift immediately. The room hadn't changed, but the intent inside it had. The first 9 seconds were no longer a test. They were data. And now the data was being processed. "This time," the same man said, "we don't compress." Bruce gave a small nod, acknowledging the adjustment. The spacing widened, angles opened. Instead of closing in, the men spread just enough to deny Bruce the pockets he had been exploiting. No overlapping paths. No interference. Each man now owned his lane, his distance, his responsibility. This wasn't swarm pressure anymore. It was controlled denial. Bruce inhaled slowly. He could feel it in his legs already. Not fatigue yet, but accumulation. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's too late. They moved again, but differently now. One advanced just enough to demand attention. Another mirrored Bruce's lateral shift, cutting off the exit before it fully existed. A third hovered just outside engagement range, waiting, not rushing, not reacting, reading. Bruce adjusted. His movement became smaller, more economical. He wasn't trying to create chaos anymore. He was trying to preserve clarity. A hand shot in, not a strike, a probe. Bruce parried instinctively, but that was the opening. Pressure arrived from the side, shoulder to shoulder, compressing his space. Bruce slipped, but not cleanly. Contact lingered longer than before. He felt fingers brush fabric, felt balance tilt, corrected just in time. Numbers were beginning to matter. "You see it now," one of them said quietly, not taunting, just stating a fact. "Speed degrades." Bruce didn't answer. He stepped in close, too close, collapsing distance before the words could settle. An elbow frame disrupted one man's base. A pivot redirected another. For a brief moment, the system bent again. But this time, it didn't break. Hands closed, not all at once, but sequentially. One wrist, then an elbow, then a shoulder. Bruce twisted, rolled, shed one grip, but another replaced it instantly. This wasn't brute force, it was layering. Bruce felt his breathing change. Not panic, calculation. Oxygen became something to manage. He dropped his center suddenly, surprising the men holding him, and rolled through the space they created instinctively to maintain balance. He came up low, already moving, but the window was smaller now. The exits were fewer. "Don't chase him," the leader said. "Let him spend." Bruce heard it. He smiled faintly. They weren't trying to win quickly anymore. They were letting time do the work. The next exchange was heavier. More contact, less elegance. Bruce's movements were still precise, but they required more effort now. His principles still worked, but each application cost him something. A breath. A step. A fraction of speed. One man went to the ground briefly, not thrown, just displaced, but Bruce paid for it immediately. Pressure closed in. A knee brushed his thigh. A forearm pinned his shoulder for half a second longer than before. He broke free, but the message was clear. This wasn't about skill ceilings, it was about sustainability. Bruce disengaged just enough to reset his posture. His chest rose and fell more visibly now. Sweat ran down his spine. He looked around the room, not searching for openings but measuring reality. "You can't do this forever," someone said. Bruce nodded. "Neither can you." The man considered that. "True," he said. "But we don't have to." That was the difference. Bruce attacked again, sharper now, more decisive. If time favored them, then precision had to favor him. He struck balance points, disrupted structure, forced reactions instead of waiting for them. For a few seconds, the room tilted back in his favor. Then the weight returned. A hand locked around his forearm. Another controlled his elbow. His shoulder hit the mat, not slammed but guided. Bruce rolled immediately, escaping the worst of it. But he didn't get clean separation this time. The men stayed attached, not aggressively, patiently. Bruce felt the edges of his vision narrow slightly. He forced himself to slow his breathing, to stay present. "This isn't about dominance," the leader said, close enough now that Bruce could hear him clearly. "It's about context." Bruce twisted, using the grip against itself, creating just enough space to stand again. He rose, posture still upright, still controlled, but the cost was undeniable now. They paused, not because they were finished, but because they had learned what they came to learn. The leader looked at Bruce differently now, not as a myth, not as a demonstration, as a variable. "You're not invincible," he said. Bruce nodded. "I never claimed to be." The man exhaled. "But you're not what we expected either." Bruce smiled faintly. "That's usually where truth lives." The room fell quiet again. No victory, no defeat. Just understanding. What the men had surrounded wasn't a superhero, and what Bruce had faced wasn't a staged challenge. It was reality, stripped of narrative. And both sides walked away knowing something they hadn't before. Principles could bend numbers. Numbers could exhaust principles. And neither told the full story alone. Outside, the night remained still. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. The men stepped back almost in unison, not retreating, just creating space. No one said stop. No one needed to. The air itself felt different now, heavier not from tension but from conclusion. What could be tested had already been tested. What could be measured had revealed its limits. Bruce stood still at the center of the room, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm he had consciously reclaimed. His body registered the fatigue, the small delays in recovery, the subtle resistance where fluidity used to live without question. But his mind was clear, clearer than when the night began. The leader approached, slow and unguarded, close enough now that the roles had dissolved. Not adversaries, not evaluator and subject, just two men comparing notes without speaking. "We train to dominate uncertainty," the man said finally. "To overwhelm variables before they overwhelm us." Bruce nodded. "And I train to become one." The man considered that, eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion but in processing. "That works," he said, "until the variables multiply." Bruce smiled faintly. That's when philosophy matters. Silence followed, not awkward, not unresolved. Around them the other men loosened their posture, no longer maintaining angles, no longer calculating distance. What they had just experienced didn't fit neatly into their operational frameworks, and that unsettled them more than failure ever could. "You didn't try to finish," one of them said. "You could have hurt someone." Bruce looked at him calmly. "Harm is easy. Control is harder." The leader nodded slowly. "And numbers?" Bruce didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room once more, not at the men, but at the space itself, as if replaying the night in reverse. "Numbers win," he said finally. "Eventually. But they don't always decide." "That sounds like something people say after losing," another man replied. Bruce shook his head. "No," he said. "It's something people say after understanding." The leader exhaled, almost a laugh, but without humor. 9 seconds, he said. "That's what we gave it." Bruce raised an eyebrow. "And?" The man paused. "It was enough." No one argued. Because what happened in those 9 seconds hadn't disproven anything. It had complicated everything. Bruce walked toward the edge of the mat. Movement slower now, but deliberate. He felt the cost of the night settling into his muscles, his joints, his nervous system. He welcomed it. Pain was information. Fatigue was feedback. Denial was the only real enemy. As he reached the wall, the leader spoke again. "If this had continued," he said, "you would have gone down." Bruce nodded. "Yes." "And if we'd hesitated," the man added, "we would have lost control." Bruce turned back to face him. "Also yes." They held each other's gaze, both understanding the implication. Truth didn't belong to either side. It lived in the overlap. The men began to leave as quietly as they had arrived. No commentary, no bravado, no need to debrief out loud. This wasn't something to brag about. It wasn't something to share. It was something to carry. At the door, the leader stopped and looked back one last time. "This isn't a movie," he said, repeating the sentence that had framed the night. Bruce smiled. That's why it mattered. The door closed behind them, the sound soft but final. Bruce remained alone in the room, the hum of the lights filling the space again. He lowered himself to the floor, not from weakness, but from respect for his body. He closed his eyes and let the sensations arrive without resistance. The ache, the fatigue, the clarity. He understood something now that no demonstration, no philosophy, no victory could have taught him alone. Skill was not invincibility. Speed was not immunity. Principles were not guarantees. They were tools, powerful ones, but still tools. What saved him that night wasn't technique. It wasn't mystique. It wasn't strength. It was adaptability without illusion. Years later, stories would circulate, exaggerated, distorted, reduced to spectacle. 10 elite soldiers, 1 martial artist, a confrontation framed like entertainment. But no one who was there would ever correct the record. Because the truth wasn't cinematic. It was quieter. 10 men had surrounded Bruce Lee and said, "This isn't a movie." And 9 seconds later, everyone in that room understood exactly why it wasn't.